Well, I didn't think there was anyone better to share their story about mental illness and addiction than Patricia Doiron. She joins me today for a conversation that I think you'll really enjoy. She's going to delve deep into her mental illness and where it stemmed and how she was able to recover from both addiction to alcohol and live a full, whole life as a woman in recovery from mental illness, something that she still continues to work on today, but it really offers hope. And that is really what I want people to get from this conversation. Patricia is the founder of WIRE, which stands for Women in Recovery Everywhere. And I'll post the links below to how you can get connected with Patricia there. So here we go with Patricia Doiron.
Here, we want to show you what's possible in the world of sobriety. We introduce you to the various tools, programs, and resources available, because there are way more options than you may even realize. We want you to find the one that works for you.
And we do it through people who share their pathway to recovery and will help you find your path to freedom. Because getting sober can feel hard enough. You don't have to do it alone. I'm Sarah Roberts.
And I'm Roger DeVoe, and this is Sobriety Starts Here.
I am so excited to be sitting down with you talking about some really important topics. Patricia Doiron, which is funny because we talked about your name and the spelling of it. It's a French name, but in English it's pronounced Doiron. And Patricia, I am so happy to have you with me today. Thank you.
Well, you're most welcome, Sarah, and thank you so much. I mean, I've been following you, and I feel like I've gotten to know you over the last number of months, and it's just a real pleasure to be here, and so excited to share my story and hopefully reach at least one other person, I always say.
I love that. Isn't that the truth? We just want to reach even that one person who's watching or listening and connect with them with this story. And I know that this will be the case. So let's dive in. First and foremost, you are the founder of WIRE, which stands for Women in Recovery Everywhere. And I wanted to ask you, why did you create this group? Where can people find it? What's it all about? And sort of who does it serve?
Okay, well, I created Women in Recovery Everywhere, and I use the acronym WIRE, but I really, it kind of, it landed on me, you know. It's part of my story where I've always been drawn to women and surrounded by women and supported by women. But really, a number of years ago, and I'll share this a bit later, but a number of years ago, after I had come through my mental illness diagnosis and started that recovery, actually, I was biking on the island here. We have trails that go tip to tip, and I was biking with two gal pals that are also in recovery. And I got to the end of one trail and was waiting for them, and I just said, "Wow, wouldn't this be fun with a whole bunch of women in recovery?" And then I just had this picture of a T-shirt with Women in Recovery Everywhere, and then WIRE came to me, and that's going back to 2000 and probably 14. And that's really where it started. Mm-hmm. And from that, and it's just, you know, hindsight's a great thing. You kind of see the stones and the stepping stones along the way and the milestones. But I see now that there continue to be occasion where I was with a group of women and just so inspired by how women can come together and share our stories and be so encouraged and supported. And it was one night I had a group of friends in and gal pals in. It was Valentine's Day, and I went to bed late and I stayed up way too late, and I woke up and the rest of the vision was there for WIRE. So what I really want to do is I really believe that, you know, individually we are strengthened by our stories, and that we're connected by the courage that it takes to live those stories and to share those stories. So it's all about strength, individual strength and collective courage. So I love people in general, but I know women, and my heart is really in supporting women. And because I've had the personal experience of knowing what it's like to feel less than, separate from, hopeless, and all those things, and I've traveled through this path of discovering the truth about who I am, and I believe that is a truth we all share about our greatness. And because I know now that it's true for me, I know it's true for everybody, every woman. And I just want to do what I can to support women in finding that truth, because it makes me so sad to see the many lies that many of us have grown to believe.
Oh my gosh. And I know that the work you're doing is helping so many people. So I know we're going to be getting into your story of addiction, of mental illness, and that's really why we wanted to dig into this conversation. But share with us, so how do women get connected with Wire? So do they go online on Facebook, and is that what they do first when they reach out to you?
Yes, and the best way to reach me is through my Facebook blog. My page is Women in Recovery Everywhere. And I will mention that is an open group. The members at this point are 98.9% women. But I just want people to know that there are secret groups and there are open groups, and this is an open group. And that's the best way to connect with me, either directly on the page or message me. I love to connect with women.
And what can people expect when they arrive at the page? What's the main purpose of it? I know that you've got videos there and you share different inspiration. What's the point of it?
Really, my whole goal in what I do under the umbrella of Wire is to share hope and encouragement. So what they will find on my page, and I have a separate blog page through WordPress, but it's always on the Facebook page as well. I share my own experience, strength, and hope as a way of encouraging and supporting women. I share one of my other objectives with Women in Recovery Everywhere is to help women become aware of the other women out there, just like me and just like you, that are doing phenomenal things. And I try to share that and lift those women up and profile them a little bit, because, you know, the more I recover and the more I learn, like, we're all so much the same, you know, and famous women, like, you know, I consider famous, you know, Brene Brown and all these wonderful women, their story is so similar. They struggle with feelings of, you know, periods of not thinking they're enough or thinking they can do it. But what sets us apart, and we all have it in us, is that courage.
Yes.
You know, and I love that. So encouragement and hope, and sharing great stories from other women.
Oh, I love it. Well, I love that. So anybody watching right now, especially women, if you are drawn to this, so head over to Women in Recovery Everywhere after you watch our segment here on Facebook and connect with Patricia there. And I will mention, Patricia, you mentioned being on an island that you can go tip to tip. You are on Prince Edward Island in Canada, and on the east coast of Canada. And I visited your beautiful island a few times now, and it is a slice of heaven. I encourage anybody watching, if you want to take an awesome vacation, spend it on I'm going to say Vancouver Island, because that's where my mother lives and that's where I like to spend time. But Prince Edward Island on the other side of the country, absolutely spectacular, home of Anne of Green Gables, and where she wrote many of her books. And oh my goodness, so I can't wait to come and visit you. I'm going to plan a trip.
Please do.
We'll do something together, I think.
Yeah, it's a great spot for soulcations and fun and community and connection. So come to our island.
Yes, go to her island. Absolutely. Yeah. So now let's dig in. Patricia, I don't know where you want to start. I would love if you would take us back to the beginning, to where you were raised, how you were raised, and sort of traveling through your story and where mental illness becomes a factor in your life, and how you overcame that, and all of it leading up to addiction and how that played a role in your life, how you overcame addiction, and how you are now running Wire.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. I'd be my pleasure to do that and share my story. And again, it's my experience as I experienced it. And I've 11 brothers and sisters, so you'd probably get that many versions. Yes, 11, which means we're 12 and 2 parents. So I grew up in a large family. I'm the 4th youngest, so quite a range from young to old. You know, and as far back as I can remember, I was a very shy, a very timid, a very anxious, even little girl. And, you know, with so many in the family, I can see now we all took on different roles. And the role that I assumed, even being, you know, one of the youngest, 3rd, I decided that I was going to be quiet. And my main goal was not to cause any extra stress or trouble, work for my parents, and particularly my mother. You know, probably typical of that generation. Mom did the lion's share of the work and the, you know, managing the household and all those things. So that's the way it was. My father, who has passed away now, he passed away in 2002. He was an alcoholic and self-confessed at the time of his death. And he quit drinking shortly after I was born. Now, depending on the version you listen to, it could be that he said, you know, I did good this time, I'm going to stop, or I need to quit drinking because look what happens. But anyway, so I don't recall Dad drinking at all. And he was an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step programs. So growing up, we got exposed to that quite a bit. We would go to meetings when Dad was picking up his chips and whatnot. And what I loved about it at the time was it gave me, I think, as you know, I think all of us crave that emotional intimacy and connection. Dad was a man of very few words. And so when I went to his meetings and we got to know him a little bit and, you know, could kind of hold on to every word that maybe would give me a little bit of insight or a little bit of, maybe a bit of recognition. But anyway, so growing up, I was very quiet and just wanted to make life easier for my mother particularly. So as I got a little bit older, some things started to happen in and around home, some very traumatic events around, you know, around abuse and sexual abuse and was the primary one. So, but I was still operating from those same rules, you know, can't bother anybody. I had older siblings, obviously, but we don't talk about this stuff. Certainly don't bother Mom because she's busy. You know, my mom is still alive today at 80. She's almost 88. And I'll just say that because of my recovery and the work that I've done, I've no resentments towards any of my family, and I'm so grateful for that. But anyway, so things started happening, too much for a little girl, I see now, but I didn't know that. I thought that my job was to handle things. So I would often, you know, find a spot by myself, which was not easy in a family that size, but, you know, maybe, you know, I remember oftentimes just going sitting in the car by myself, and just quite often that's where I would cry and kind of get it out and pull myself together. So that was that. So I didn't share with anybody. So this kind of continued for years to come. And then there were some.
Patricia, I don't mean to go into anything that you don't want to go into, no. But are you saying that you were sexually abused as a young child and you held on to that and didn't share that with anybody?
No, I didn't share it with anybody. Okay. Didn't feel I could or should. Mm. So, you know, and then as I got a bit older, you know, this was probably 10-ish. And as I got a little bit older, then I was always trying to, you know, I know now I was always trying to be enough, to prove that I was enough. Yeah. So, you know, at a young age, and too young really, I started babysitting for the neighbors. And, you know, I was probably 11 or 12. And that, the father of that household was a very active, violent, vulgar alcoholic, or in my opinion, certainly had a drinking problem. And so I was exposed to it there as well. But again, you know, this I felt was gaining me points, or gaining me a little more worthiness, because I was, you know, I was so mature and I was out doing this and making a little bit of money. And so I wasn't going to sacrifice that for, you know, for me, for self-care. And because, you know, and I've such greater insight now, but, you know, all I wanted as a little girl, all we want is to be loved and cared for. So that was my main goal.
So are you saying that the fellow that you babysat for, he also sexually abused you?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Patricia, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, thank you. And so, you know, that was going on. And then to top it all off, as I got a little bit older, so it was all going on kind of all around me. And there was a friend of my father's, also in recovery, supposedly, made some advances as well, you know. So it just kept piling up. And so that was really, really difficult. And, you know, I remember particularly around I don't know, 13, 14, which is a difficult time to begin with for young girls, at least.
Yeah.
I just remember that being a particularly, it was a stressful time. I'd started a new school. You know, at that time, French immersion had just been introduced. So 5 of us had been selected from our little school to do that. And I felt, you know, that was kind of over my head. So I was stressing over that, had all these other burdens I was carrying. So I remember being a very stressful time, but still living by the house rules, the unwritten rules. So, so that would have been junior high. High school came along, and you know, little fish in a bigger pond. I'd gone to a small elementary school, a little bit larger for junior high because we went to French immersion, but then high school was, you know, large for our standards here on the island at that time, especially. And that's really when I discovered the magic power of beer.
Yeah.
Because I was, you know, I would have been, I don't know, 14, 15 in high school. And I was always very mature for my age. I looked mature and I acted mature. And so I was able to get into bars starting at 15 in high school. And, you know, so we'd go out with my friends and go out. And, you know, then eventually I turned 18, we'd go to the bar, same bar, and nobody clued in that, well, if you're just 18 now, you must have been younger then. Same bartender, but.
Is the drinking age still 18 on Prince Edward Island?
19.
19 now, yeah.
Yeah, it's 19 now. So, no, so that started that high school, you know, again, so I'm carrying a lot of anxiety and distress, trauma as it is. And then I get high school where I feel more out of my element. So I discovered drinking, and particularly our little group, there was one gal we hung around with was older, so she was able to get our alcohol for us. But still not really dealing with anything. I didn't know I had anything to deal for. Like, it was my normal. So I didn't know any better. So it started, you know, just parties and whatnot. But I remember the very first time, and it was, I loved it.
Yeah.
And I loved what it did for me.
Yeah.
And of course, at the time, I always remember you couldn't buy cold beer at the time on the island here anyway. So it was warm beer, and what was being, the one that was buying it, she always bought Labatt's. And I don't know if you've had a warm Labatt's beer, but it's like, tastes like a skunk might taste. But, you know, it didn't matter. Got it down, and I got that magic kicked in.
Mm-hmm.
And my goodness, I felt like I belonged a little bit. I felt like I could talk to people, and even boy people. And, you know, I was even might have been a little bit funny and comfortable and confident.
Yeah.
So that was a relief.
Mm-hmm.
And it was probably when I was drinking, I would open up a little bit. I would allude to, you know, some of the struggles I was having, but never, I was probably testing the water.
Yeah.
Never went very far with it. But, you know, it wasn't long that it started turning on me. So I, you know,
well,
and the thing,
like alcohol started to like
start turning on me. Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
And because I was this, you know, mature, responsible one of the family, I never had a lot of rules. I could stay out till all night and explain it easily. I could sit out in the car in the driveway till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and nobody would question it. And I do remember thinking sometimes, like, I wish I had that out. I wish I had, you know, I wish I could say, oh, I got to get home, you know, mom or dad will be mad at me or whatever. But I never thought to say it anyway, and I never had it. So again, that desire to fit in and be enough, like alcohol gave me the little boost I needed to take those to make those moves that, you know, value-wise and moral-wise were going against me. But I didn't know how to speak my mind. I didn't know how to say no. You know, I didn't know, which I understand now why. But no to a male, I don't think so.
Yeah. So you would be out at parties drinking, and things would, you know, get heated with a boy, and you would continue with him. You know, you would have sex with that boy.
Yeah. And just know. And, you know, I still remember how I knew even when I was drinking, I knew I didn't want it, but it was my it was my opportunity, my potential opportunity to arrive and be somebody, even if it's for a few moments, and then tomorrow they're going to pretend that they didn't know me.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that continued, you know, mostly weekends and just kind of typical high school. But my response to alcohol wasn't typical. For me, it was changing who I was, and that's why I always drank, to change. You know, I loved how it made me feel. As I got a little bit.
Would you say you were always getting drunk? Like I know for me, in my experience, especially in high school, it was drinking to get drunk. I wasn't just having a couple. Like, I was definitely making sure that I was intoxicated.
Yeah, I never really understood or made much sense of the value or the use of having one or two.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I had no, like most of us, I had no idea I was on the road to becoming an alcoholic or, you know, have a problem with alcohol, because I saw what it did, you know, indirectly in my house through, you know, my father, although I was in recovery, that the effects are still there. I saw it in other family members, and I truly believe that this did not suit the picture of an alcoholic or the typical alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so getting drunk was my goal. Changing was my goal. Becoming somebody else was my goal.
Mm-hmm.
So high school was going on. When I was probably 15 or 16, I guess, I started going out with a boy who was, if I was 15, he was probably 19. Too old for me in so many ways, but you know, the family knew him, and that was enough. So it, again, so often over my head, but anyway, to make a long story short, that boy, he went out west like all good island boys do for a time and work. And I was determined that I needed to follow him out there. So I was able to graduate from high school in January instead of June, just because of my credit situation. So myself and another girlfriend at the time, we packed our bags and went to, I guess it was Calgary. And, you know, I was so naive. Like, I thought, okay, at the time there was a whole group of guys and girls, and one of my brothers and my sister and her boyfriend were living in this house together because the guys would go out and work. And so I thought I was just going to join that group and just like be one of the gals, and I'd room with one of the gals. And I was so naive, you know. So I get out there, and my boyfriend assumed that we were going to live together. So I didn't have a voice. I didn't know how to get out of it. So I just went along with it. So to make a long story short, that continued until April, when I discovered I was pregnant. So 35 years ago. So then I was in a dilemma. What do I do? And my main concern was, oh my gosh, you know, my mother's going to be so disappointed. And then my dad didn't talk very much. He did usually listen, but usually the way it worked was if we wanted something, I wanted to tell dad something, we would tell mom and she would tell dad, and, you know, back the other way. Mm-hmm. So, but you know, as traumatic sometimes and as chaotic as home was, that was often the place I wanted to be. If I was out, you know, as a younger kid, like I could never do sleepovers. You know, sleeping over at a friend's house, even as you know, in elementary school, I was too anxious, and I would always get very homesick. And I've learned since that, you know, at least the chaos at home, it's somewhat predictable and you know the drill. Or when you're in a strange house with strange noises and people you don't really know, then, you know, you can't predict it. So anyway, so when I out west ended up pregnant and went home. So at the time I got home in, say April, May or something. And so my boyfriend at the time was still out in Calgary. And so I probably told maybe one of my sisters or something, but I had to tell my mother because he was eventually coming home. So April passed, May passed, I think it was like early June. He calls me, he's at that time we just had the ferry. He's getting on the ferry crossing to come home. So it's been 2 months, and I said, oh my gosh, I need to tell mom before you get here. So at the last minute, I told mom that day. And, you know, that it all plays a part, in life and recovery and suffering. But I was so concerned with my mom, and she was upset. Like, you know, she had such high expectations for me and my siblings. When I told them, especially my older sisters, then they were, well, you know, poor mom. And I'm thinking, woohoo! Like, I was 18, but, you know, in many ways mature, but still in very, very many ways immature. Like, so it was very, you know, quite a dramatic and traumatic situation. Everybody had an opinion. You know, I had 3, 4, 5 older sisters, so some of them had very strong opinions on what I should do and so forth and so on. So
was there ever any thought to terminate the pregnancy? Like, were you in love with this boy?
No. No to both questions. No, I see now. I loved him as well as I could, I suppose. I had no thought to terminate it. Although I think if I would have been pushed, like I wanted to, but I was such a people pleaser at the time and so intent on trying to make things right when I thought I'd done so wrong. But it was suggested by certainly some of my sisters that I should give it up to parents that could give the baby everything that was needed. But I didn't. There was something in me that knew that I wouldn't do that and that I wanted. Now, you know, it's at the time it was probably, no, I want someone that I can love and that will at least be mine. And, you know, no regrets.
And I have to ask, so during this time when you learned that you're pregnant, were you drinking leading up to that in Calgary? And then when you got pregnant, was there any thought of, oh my gosh, I can't drink anymore now that I'm pregnant? Was that a factor at all for you?
I had been in Calgary, but once I got pregnant, I was so scared and worried and anxious that I knew that I wasn't going to, it wasn't an issue that I recall. So anyway, so then the boyfriend comes home and I have the baby that January, baby girl, my oldest daughter, Melissa. And so come that Mother's Day, because it's such a, you know, it would look really good if we got engaged on Mother's Day, because, you know, got to create some kind of fairy tale here. So that's what we did. We went out to the beach, and I'm making light of it, but I'm not, you know, I'm not, no disrespect to my ex-husband. Anyway, so but you know, I didn't think I had any choice. I was so convinced that I had to make things as right as I could after having made things so wrong. So, you know, there's a whole theme of, you know, a lot of guilt and anxiety building up over the years.
Yeah.
So got engaged, and by the following summer, I somehow had the moment of something. I know it was a moment of clarity or weakness or something where I knew I needed to break up, which I did for a while. And that's probably was one of the periods where my drinking was really most out of control, because I was convinced that I had, you know, missed so much of my young adulthood, and that, you know, I was a young mother and I'd been through so much, and that I needed to sow my wild oats, and sow them I did. So that again was, you know, a period of great alcohol abuse, because I was younger than some of my siblings, and I was kind of always doing my own thing. I didn't know a lot of people in the community. And I remember that year, and I was working locally at a very popular drinking establishment, and meeting people, and, you know, I tell them which family I belonged to, and they said, "Oh, really? Like, we didn't know you." So I really thought, okay, I'm gonna make up for that last time, and partied really a lot. And again, my value system got, you know, I went against it so often, and, you know, the drill, great time at night. You wake up the morning, oh fudge, you know, what did I do? And how am I gonna live with that? How am I gonna make that right? And, you know, and then the me with the great, you know, anxiety and the worry and the, you know, the shy introverted me, like, then you'd run into somebody that you'd seen the night before and sober. I didn't know how to interact with them or what to say to them, and especially if it was somebody that I'd really partied with. So, you know, thinking back, I hated that time. I really did. It was a lot of fun, I say, but it was a time of great turmoil.
Yeah.
And at this point, I hadn't talked about or dealt with the abuse at all. And it was only probably when my daughter was, she was probably like 3 or 4. And there was things going on in the community where there was talk that maybe there was some sexual abuse involved with other families. And it just triggered me that, I guess, that it prompted me to start getting some help, talking to professionals about my abuse. So I was probably 23, 24, and it continues today.
Yeah.
But that was the beginning of it. So eventually I got back with that boyfriend because I was just hell-bent that I was going to make things right. And most often it was with I want to get back in what I thought were the good graces of my mother and my community. I want to be upstanding, and I want to be a valued member of the community and of the family, and not be carrying this, you know, shame and guilt. So got married to the dad of Melissa's dad. And, you know, I really believed that it was the right thing to do at the time, because I didn't place any value on this, you know, this voice of wisdom and insight deep within me. Now that I recognize and know to be my highest self, you know, I would just push it down and try to get rid of it. So I went ahead and got married. And then the next best thing I could do, I thought, well, I'm going to have another baby. And this time I will do it right. You know, I'll do it within the marriage, confines of marriage, or the beauty of marriage, I mean. And really that was a big part of it. And when Melissa was, well, we got married when she was 5, and her sister was born when she was 8.
So you get engaged on the beach on Mother's Day before you have Melissa.
No, Melissa's born in January. We got engaged in May.
Okay.
Broke up in June.
Yep.
Got back together. I told my boyfriend that I'd broken up with that we were on and off a lot. And I told him, I said, okay, I think I can marry you now. So I proposed to him, we say, probably about a year later. And then got married in, when did we get married? 87.
Okay.
Yeah. So Melissa was just a bit, turned 5.
And then you decide to have a second child. Yeah.
When she was 8. And so I didn't drink. I was before I knew I was pregnant with my second one, I was still drinking a lot. And, you know, and a lot of my family, my kids, like, were shocked when I came out and said that I need to quit drinking. Nobody saw anything. Yeah. Nobody lived in here in my head with me. You know, that was the thing. Mm-hmm. And because I wasn't a loud, rowdy drinker, then, you know, I just was, you know, they probably say you're just a more relaxed, fun you, because I was so uptight all the time. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so leading up to, before I knew I was pregnant, I certainly drank with my second daughter. While I was pregnant, I didn't. And after she was born, for a while, I still, I drank. And again, weekends, but it was advancing, it was progressing, because I got very, I would never say that I was a manipulative person back then, but I did. You know, I knew how to start fights to get out of the house without feeling guilty that I was just getting out of the house to go party with my friends, but I did it. So I manipulated people, my husband at the time, you know, around babysitting with other people. It's like, you know, I'd build this really pitiful scenario and they'd jump in and rescue me. So this is just continuing, and probably, you know, at this time, I'm into my my career. I had just retired from 32 years with the federal government, so at this time I'm doing okay at that. And probably by the time Julia's, you know, I don't know, starting school, the drinking is easing up, and I become a workaholic because I'm still striving to prove that I'm somebody, that I'm worthy enough. And because, you know, in many ways, my addiction and my mental illness, the undiagnosed mental illness, made me kind of an ideal employee in many ways because I was so driven. I was low maintenance. I didn't ask a lot of questions, or I didn't need a lot of support. I did, but I would close my office door and figure out how to do it on my own. So, and I didn't miss work, because if I missed work, like, who would do the work? But more importantly, they might realize how replaceable I am. Mm. So that kind of kept on trucking, kept on going. And I, you know, climbed the ladder as much as I wanted to. And then things really, so all over this time, I'm married, and we have, you know, the house and 2 kids and dog and probably a couple of cars. We got all the stuff and all the life that's supposed to make me happy. And I didn't know at the time, but I was very unhappy, very, you know, and the kids now would attest to it, that, you know, that I wasn't very happy. You know, we'd go on holidays and I'd be so stressed trying to make sure we had a good time. And, you know, and we joke about it now. I'm grateful that we can talk about it. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so in 2005, so I'm gradually getting more and more into my work, getting in, probably maxing out at my capacity to, as far as work goes, and spending more time at work, because it was, some ways it was easier than being at home, because I didn't really know, deep down, I didn't know how to do the home life, the married life, the mom and all that. Like I didn't feel very qualified. So in 2005, I ended up going on assignment, a very demanding assignment, and a lot of responsibility, where we took a group of veterans to overseas for the 60th anniversary of D-Day, because I was retired from Veterans Affairs. So this is like a large delegation of senior veterans. We had politicians, we had youth, you know, just a whole mix. So that job was exhausting. It was draining mentally. Like, we would work till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and the bloody BlackBerry would ring in the morning at 6 o'clock to get up, and I came to hate that sound. So it was very grueling. And I didn't drink on that trip very much, because we didn't really have time, and I was constantly full of anxiety, because I didn't know how to, I didn't know what my ceiling was, and I didn't know if I reached it, could I talk to anybody? I didn't think I could say, okay, I've got enough, I'm full. So I just kept pushing.
Do you mean at work you didn't know where your ceiling was, or so you didn't know where the limit was as far as how far you could go in your career?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Or how far I could push myself, you know, physically through the work. And when it was okay to cry uncle, or to ask for help, you know, in any aspect of my life, really. So we spent probably about, between being overseas, and we gathered in Ottawa and then traveled and came back to Ottawa. So I was probably gone from home about 3 weeks. At this time, my oldest daughter is living probably in Toronto, and my youngest daughter is home with my husband. So on that trip, I didn't drink, but except for the last night, we had a farewell party gathering with all the delegates and everybody. And I didn't drink a lot, but I drank enough to take the edge off, and to just kind of, dance a little bit with that line between, you know, I could just let go altogether, and, you know, just relaxed enough and funny enough. And, you know, I could have crossed the line, but I didn't. Anyway, so I got home, and that really is probably one of the most significant milestones of my life and my recovery. I got home, and for some reason, I knew getting back home that I could not get back on the horse. The horse being mostly my marriage. And I couldn't point to anything that had happened specifically. I think just the distance and then coming home so exhausted in all ways, I think was a blessing in disguise. I think deep down I knew that I couldn't keep pretending and trying to be someone I wasn't. So I decided, within fairly short measure that I need to separate from my husband. And through some strange miracle, and I believe it is that it was some sort of divine intervention, I knew that I also need to quit drinking. Because I knew that if I separated and was a single woman again and drank, it would not be a good combination. And I don't know why, and when I reflect back now, I just say, okay, that was definitely a divine moment of some sort of intervention, because it kind of doesn't make sense in the sense how did I know? How did I know? But I think because I'd been exposed to recovery and Alcoholics Anonymous through my dad, and I'd gotten a taste of that. And I would often, growing up, AA has a little monthly magazine that comes out, The Grapevine. I would often snatch that when Dad had it and kind of find a spot by myself and read the stories. And I loved it. And I just thought it was because it was nice stories. But it's because there was such hope. I always read about hope. So anyway, so that in May of 2005 is when I began part one of my recovery journey. And
now you mentioned that you had already started seeking professional help with a therapist in your 20s.
Yeah.
And did you continue with the same therapist all the way along, or?
Oh no, I've had a number of therapists. Some of them retired. No, kind of depended what I was going through, and new ones came on the scene. Probably over my my recovery career over the last 30 years, I probably had I'm going to say 4 key therapists that I saw, and then kind of the longer term ones, and then shorter intermittent ones.
But can I ask, was that first meeting with that first therapist that you had, did you share with them about the abuse from childhood?
I did. I shared that it had happened. I don't know. I'm thinking I didn't get into probably a whole lot of details of where and when, and I was still very removed from the impact it had on me and how much shame I was carrying. It certainly started the ball rolling. It was, it's been a heck of a lot of work healing from that, because it just gets into every fiber and every thread of my being.
Can you share with us how you have been able to heal from the abuse?
It was 2005 that I quit drinking and quit marriage. So I trucked along for 5 years on this path of recovery, dealing with the abuse and the traumas kind of on a as needed, as required, although I did do fairly diligently, but I could only go so deep at the time. And as far as recovery, I had a problem with a few concepts, such as I grew up with in a religious family. I went to church. So I had a understanding of a God, but he wasn't a very nice dude. And I had a huge problem with that because I grew up believing that it was this big, hairy, scary man that was a judge, and that he was waiting for me to make one false move and the rug was pulled out from under me. So that's what I believed. So I kind of believed that I was out of luck. So so I just became very self-reliant. I said, well, I will just kind of be my own. I didn't think I was that great, but I thought I was kind of godly. So I just said, I'll look after myself. So I had a real hard time with surrender. So I would slowly start to trust some people with some things, but there are some things that I held on to. I really didn't think that there was, I think deep down, I didn't think that I would ever heal to the point of feeling like I was enough. Mm-hmm. I didn't think I would ever be undamaged. Mm-hmm. So I held on to some things. In 2010, after holding on for 2010 was 8 years ago. I'm 54, so 46 years. And, my life was, probably from the time I was 5 or 6 was a lot of anxiety. So in 2010, I got to a point where, and it was building up in hindsight, I see now, I got to a point where the darkness was overpowering me. I was still working, and I literally would get home from work. I was living alone in Charlottetown. I would get home, I would lock the door, I would pull the blinds, I would ignore my phone, I would put on my flannel pajamas, my fluffy house coat, and I would lay on the couch covered up and watch Criminal Minds. And Criminal Minds is not the most calming, relaxing show to watch. It's a little anxiety-inducing, but it gave me a really good escape because I couldn't really relate to it at all. Mm-hmm. But so I was isolating. I was full of fear and anxiety, and that was the first and gratefully the last time that I experienced hopelessness. Mm. So the depth and the extreme darkness of hopelessness, I never want to feel that again. And that's really the main thing that motivates me to share my story and try to support others. Mm-hmm. Because, I remember telling, I wasn't sharing with anybody, but they knew I was struggling. And I said, I've done all this work. I've gone to therapy for, decades now. I go to my meetings. I did the steps, and I have a gratitude list, and I look after myself, and I made amends, and I am still feeling like nothing. Mm-hmm. And I feel worse in the sense than I ever did, because now I feel hopeless on top of that. Mm. It was just awful. And I was just my mind was just so full of swirling, and I was, no appetite and losing weight for no reason. And it was really, really awful. And I still felt so alone.
Was there ever a point where you considered drinking again?
I didn't. No, because I wanted, if I was going to do something, it was going to be more final, or more of a guarantee that it was going to help. And so it probably would have been pills or something. I would have done something that would have been a little more guaranteed that I would end it. I never wanted to die, but I wanted to end this turmoil and this constant, at this point I had, and there were certainly great parts of my life, but it seemed like that, it's been 45 years or whatever of this. And if I live another 40 years, I just got more of this, no, thank you. Yeah. No, thank you. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have any hope. And so I just, kept putting one foot in front of the other until, I guess it was December of 2010. I remember clearly, it was Sunday morning, and it was a beautiful winter's day, and there was snow, and it was sunny and bright. And I remember waking up, and I said, I'm going to go out to the country and visit my sister. And I was feeling okay. I thought I was. And by the time I got out there, I was just, the darkness, it's like it came in out of the car with me and sat on her couch. And by the time we had coffee or something, and I was just overcome with this darkness, and all I could do was cry. And it wasn't even a cry it was just despair. And, so I thank God that she knew enough and was able to get me, we went to emergency and waited, the required 6 or 7 hours. But, I was treated well. And at that point, I kind of didn't care. My biggest concern then was I didn't really care where I was and what I did. But so we're in the room waiting to see the psychiatrist, and I'm in there, and all I can think about is, okay, this big, burly, mean psychiatrist is going to come in, and it's going to be he, and he's going to have 2 attendants with him, and they're going to have the white jackets, and she's going to have the big needle, and they're going to put me in a white jacket, give me a shot, and I will be gone forever. So I'm just in there saying, okay, you know, God, if you're up there, I'm doubtful right now, but please bring me in a nice psychiatrist. So she comes in, and she's a she, and she's as, you know, bigger than life and very outgoing and flamboyant. And I'm thinking, oh, thanks a lot. But she ended up being the greatest, best thing that could have happened to me at that time, because she was kind of a no nonsense. And she asked me, well, you know, she did her assessment, and finally I was diagnosed with, she diagnosed me fairly quickly with post-traumatic stress disorder and major depressive disorder. And as soon as she said that, most people would think, well, oh, that's discouraging. But I felt a bit of hope come back. Yeah. And the thought that came to me in my mind, well, oh God, maybe life doesn't have to be this hard. Yeah. Maybe like life doesn't have to be this hard. That's the best I can say for it. And so the flame of hope that was gone, just I could see it flickering, and you know, and at that point,
coming with her, giving it a name, like labeling it, telling you that this isn't you, this is something that's going on with you that's treatable.
Absolutely. And that was the thing. I was convinced for up to that point, for those 40 plus years, that it was me. Yeah. It was because I was faulty, I was wired poorly or damaged or whatever the case may be. So she gave me that hope. And at that point that night, I kind of decided that, you know, I don't trust anybody else. I'm not sure there's God up there. So doctor, you're my new greater power or higher power. And so unfortunately or fortunately, she said, well, you can go home with your sister or we'll get you a bed. And I was just like, I don't care. Like, I'll go home with my sister, and she goes to work tomorrow. I'll just stay home and cry all day. And she said, well, I guess you're getting to bed then. But at that time, we have a unit in our hospital for psychiatric patients. And then we have a separate small hospital, the Hillsborough Hospital, which is also psychiatric patients. And there was nothing in Unit 9, so I had to go to the Hillsborough Hospital, which is, I don't know how it is in Ottawa, but I think they find the oldest and most dilapidated buildings and make them your psychiatric hospital. So that's what ours is. And I'm probably exaggerating a wee bit, but not a whole lot. So I went there, I guess it was the next day by the time I got to bed. And oh my God, I was scared. I was so scared. Like, I just, you know, because I'm 40 some, but there's parts of me that are still a 12, 13-year-old little girl. And, you know, I'm alone, and, you know, thank God for my sister, and my kids were supportive. But you know, the first thing I asked the nurse, when I got my room and they did all their things, and, you know, can I lock my room? Can I lock my door? And she said, no. She said, but promise we'll keep an eye on you, and we'll check on you lots. So I gradually got a little more comfortable, but, you know, it was so, and it's, you know, it was the worst time in my life, but the best time. And it was an awful place it seemed to be, but at the same time, it did so much for me, because and it was because of that doctor, that psychiatrist. The nurse told me, she said, well, she saw you, but she won't keep you on because she has full patient load. But for some reason, she kept me on. Oh. So I continued to work with her for, you know, probably 3-4 years. Yeah. And at that time, I was still working full time. And I'd taken, you know, a couple of weeks off to get rested. And I ended up being off work for just over 2 years. Wow. Which is, you know, I don't do days off. Yeah. Unless I have, like a broken light that's really dangly, so you know it's broken. But I was that sick and that hopeless. But yet there was something in me, you know, and I'm so grateful for that flame that she sparked, that made me just want to get better. Like, I just, oh God, I was just so tired of being that other person. And
so 2 years off of work, but you're not 2 years in that psychiatric hospital, are you?
No, thank you, Lord. I was 7 days. 7 days. So yeah, so I kept in, and because I had supports, and I was able to assure her and prove to her that, she said, well, basically, we need a treatment plan if we're going to discharge you, and I had to make some commitments and some promises. And she scared me just enough that if I promised her something, you can be sure I was going to do it. Mm-hmm. So I had to, you know, it was coming up to Christmas, so I had to tell her my plan for decorating and shopping and baking. So I was that sick that I let somebody decorate my house. Like, I don't do that. You know, so I had my sisters come in, and I just remember sitting there, and my daughters, and, you know, and I was really, so I told her that, and then I'd gotten away from, I was always regular attendance at my AA meetings, but gotten away from those because they were too scary. There was too many people there. I felt very unsafe for no reason other than my illness at the time. So I told her I'd get back to that. I would slowly let people in, slowly. And I would go out walking every day because I always loved to walk, but I'd stop that because I just, nothing mattered.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so I stayed off work for 2 years, worked really, really hard at recovery. It was a long road in some ways, you know, a lot of peaks and valleys. I had to see her regularly. I had to follow through my commitments. I had to, you know, medication is part of my story. It's part of my life today still. Mm-hmm. I had to come to terms with that. Mm-hmm. I have no qualms about that now. I take thyroid medication because I don't have a thyroid. Mm-hmm. And I take my drugs for mental illness because my chemistry is requires it. My body is missing something.
I'm so glad you bring that up because I know that there are several conversations going on at any one time about how we're supposed to feel about medication, especially for people in recovery. And I'm just so encouraged when I hear people like you share your story and to say, it's part of my story. It's part of what I need to keep myself healthy. And there is no shame in requiring medication for whatever it is. Yes, we can do better with exercise and with our nutrition, our diet, with meditation, with really being of service, with doing all of these wonderful things. But if our brains aren't working properly, sometimes medication is exactly what's needed. And there should be no shame in that.
No, absolutely. And you know, I've heard those same discussions, and it's rather irresponsible, I think, because, you know, most of us aren't medical professionals, and if we are, we're not treating the person in front of us. And I have no business advising on medical issues and prescriptions and drugs. And, you know, I listened to a video the other night, and the speaker, she was amazing, and she said, you know, okay, well, I'll go off my medication. You take your glasses off and try to drive.
Yeah.
You know. Or you stop taking those little blue pills that you take every night, you know, so, and it just, you know, so I just always think of it, and I share this with people, is that my body is missing something. So I'm adding it to it, and only by doctor's orders, and I don't abuse it. I don't take it for any reason other than to stay alive and well. So, yeah, I went through periods, and it takes a while to get used to it and to come to terms with it, you know, being reliant on this drug. But it happened for me, and I tried at different times to wean off, always with my doctor though. I never tried to do it on my own. And I would say it was because I was feeling good, but I really worked through it that, you know, a lot of it was ego. And that I just don't want to say that I was reliant on something. I want to make sure that I was, you know, fitting in and not being judged, and none of that matters now, you know.
So because I'm not altogether familiar with mental illness, you know, the way that somebody who has dealt with it firsthand is, does the PTSD trace back to the sexual abuse, and does the depression come from the PTSD and the anxiety? Like, how do you know how it all fit together?
Well, certainly the PTSD is based on the you know, the trauma, the abuse. Probably gave birth to it, and then growing up in, you know, in by times traumatic and chaotic environments contributed to it, so it probably aggravated it. And then being in a work situation where I never felt that I could ask for help, so I was always on, you know, always on high alert to watch for danger of, you know, something coming at me that I might not be able to handle, or somebody saying something. So it all contributed to it, rooted in the trauma for me. And then my understanding is just from a layperson's, from my own experience, is that then the anxiety and depression was probably brought on because of how I was trying to cope with life for so long. It's like my system just got worn down because I was using parts of my system for purposes they weren't created for. And it's like, you know, my body got tired, and my mind and my spirit kind of got tired. It's like driving on three tires and one rim. It just, it's meant to all operate together, and that's not how it was working for me. So that's certainly my experience, is that the depression, anxiety just peaked when I couldn't handle it on my own anymore. And so I'm grateful for that I got to that point, because I was a bit of a tough nut. I wasn't going to surrender and wave the flag easily. And I believe that my spirit really wanted me to come home. Mm-hmm. And the only way to get my attention was, it tried gently and lovingly to bring me down, but I was fighting it, because I thought it was the worst thing that could have happened. Like, I was convinced that when I got out of the hospital after those 7 days, that if I walked down the street and somebody saw me, it would be obvious by looking at me that I just gotten out of the hospital and that I now had a mental illness. Like, I believe that. Wow. And that, Sarah, that's what stigma is. It's self-stigma. It's also the stigma of from the public. So that's kind of my belief on that.
How did you reconcile that then, walking down the street? How did you get to the place where you no longer felt that way, that people could see it? And then when did you get to the place where you were comfortable sharing it with other people?
At first, because I had promised my doctor that I would get out and walk every day, and I lived downtown Charlottetown, which is where head office of my work is located. So we've got we're a small city, but 1,100 of those city folk are fellow public servants in my department. So I said, oh my gosh, I didn't want them to see me, because they'd say, you're not at work today. And I didn't think to just say no and keep trucking. I thought I'd have to explain.
Yeah.
So I got very creative. I avoided peak lunch hours and coffee breaks, or I'd walk in the opposite direction. How did I get over that fear? It was very gradual. I had to really, I really had to honor my healing and my recovery and my process. So I had to take it very slow, keeping in mind that I knew I had to learn again to trust and to reach out. So I would, let select person in one at a time. And eventually, because I was blessed with a few people in my circle that could understand, probably had their own experience with mental illness, or people that were just really compassionate and kind, that when I shared it with them, they didn't pass out or faint and say, oh my God, judge me. So that made it safe there. So I just gradually kind of expanded my circle and my circle of people I trusted and would talk to. Mm-hmm. And I guess after, so over those 2 years, I got into a lot of recovery. I discovered a lot of new recovery tools. And one of the main things that I really think saved my life in some ways is yoga, not because of the yoga, but because of the meditation. Mm-hmm. Early on in my recovery, after I got out of the hospital, I remember my mind was still so busy. I still wasn't sleeping, and I just felt, totally out of control and messed up. But I remember thinking, well, I'll go to yoga, and if I only get, 10 seconds of the final pose lying on the mat, if I only get 2 seconds of peace of mind, then I'll take that. I'll settle for that. Mm-hmm. And so it really eventually, the 2 seconds became 3 seconds, and then, I felt more at peace there, and I felt very safe in the yoga community that I was going to, and I kind of went to a couple classes consistently with the same group and felt very supported and knew the instructor well. So yoga was one thing, and the meditation, and then eventually start to learn more and be very interested in meditation and the different types of meditation, and make that part of my regular practice. So that helped. So through all this time, I'm still I'm back to meetings. I'm seeing my psychiatrist, my medical doctor, keeping in touch there, and a therapist, where we're going to and it's funny, I was seeing a therapist right up until I ended up in the hospital, and it was a man at that time, and I was such a good actress. Like I kept it together so well. I presented so well for so many years that he was very surprised. Everybody was very surprised that I ended up, in the hospital and that sick, as were my coworkers and my bosses and everything. But so anyway, during once I got out of the hospital, I knew at that point that I had to go deeper with some of my therapy, and I decided to. Around that time, I decided I need to work with a female, because I know once I get into the kind of the more in depth with the abuse and the trauma, that I would need that safety and security. Mm-hmm. So worked really hard with her, and did a lot of meditation, did my walking, and tried to look after myself. And really, as hard as it was for me to take time off work, and I had to go 2 weeks at first, I turned the corner really quickly, where I knew that if I wanted to, first it was if I want to live, then I need to do this. And then I want to do more than just survive. I wanted to thrive. And, that slowly worked its way into me, and hope started to build and build and build. So I think that,
I was just going to say, I think that it's interesting. You were saying that you'd been going to therapy for decades, and yet you'd never gotten into these issues. So I think there's a point to be made about the timing of life, that it just was the right timing for you. And then also meeting with that therapist that you just clicked with, that it just really felt right. So maybe some advice to people, if you're watching and you have been going to therapy for a long time and you don't feel like you're turning any corners, maybe there's a point to be made to look for somebody else that you might connect with a bit more strongly, or maybe getting really real with yourself and getting to that point where you're able to share what you really need to share, not presenting perfectly. I mean, there's only so much that a therapist can do. If you're coming in every session saying, everything's fine, I'm doing much better, and everything's great, he's just checking the boxes going, okay, she's still trucking along.
No, absolutely. And that's such a good point, is if you're working with a therapist and, it's going on for some time, then it's really, I found this, and I'm glad you brought it up, it's really important to ask yourself, do I need some newness here? Because, I know when I see somebody too long, it's like, I just go in, I kind of do the same old. And it's not that I'm resisting, but there's no kind of challenge there and newness. So, and early on, I didn't have the confidence, or I didn't think I could dare break up with my therapist, I remember one of them, I stayed with him way too long, but I didn't know how to break it off, because, I didn't realize at the time, I didn't think it mattered that, I'm the client here, and so it's really important to, if you've got an inkling, if you can get in touch with it, or you just think you want to try something different, a new approach, then I say go for it.
Yeah. Well, you even just posted something recently on Wire talking about breaking up with people if they aren't serving you anymore. Hairdressers, if you don't like the way they're doing your hair, you're the client. You have the prerogative to move on to somebody else. So same thing with therapy. So I love that you've touched on some of the tools that you've used in your recovery. And I do think you and I have had some conversations, and you sort of look at alcohol. It's so far gone now. You're so far past that. Now it's more that you really are, you really talk to, when you're sharing, it's more so about the mental illness. And I think that was what was so important about having this conversation today, because there are so many overlaps. It's all, intertwined with so many people. We're dealing with mental illness, anxiety, depression, PTSD, addiction. Like it can all, sort of there's such interplay with all of that's going on. So you've mentioned meditation is a big one. Yoga is a big one for me too. If you're watching right now and you are just newly sober and you're thinking, what can I do? I encourage you to practice yoga, even in your own living room with a video. Just get on a mat and like Patricia was saying, even just laying down in savasana, which is that final relaxation pose, just taking a minute to be on our mats. It is powerful. It feels like it's not going to be when you first start, and then you realize it is everything. It's incredible. It's truly transformative. And I know you talked about walking. That's another tool in your toolbox. Patricia, what are some other tools? And of course, therapy as well, seeing somebody that you trust. Are there any other tools that you'd like to share with other people that are struggling with mental illness or with addiction that have worked for you?
Yeah, I think the other couple that I couldn't do without, when I do without, I don't do so well, is writing, journaling, whatever you want to call it. But just, you know, and quite often for me, it's just free flow writing. Like the big thing for me is get it out of my head, get it out of my head. And so I just write. Sometimes I might write to my little self, my younger me. Sometimes I write to, you know, Dear Diary. Sometimes I write to my higher power. But it's important for me to get it out of my head and write. The other thing is writing and having a support network. And preferably, you know, live and in person. Certainly in conjunction, there's some amazing Facebook groups, and Sarah and some of her friends have been going with homies. We've got so many of them that are really helpful and focused to women, and it's become a big part of my recovery. But I don't think I could be where I am today without my most trusted gal pals, because that face-to-face, that contact, you know, then you really get to see somebody's support and compassion when you can connect through the eyes and you know, have that. And for me, and I think as women, sometimes we've been neglected in that caring, compassion, and support from others. And I think as women, that's something we can gift each other with, and it helps us both. So.
Oh, I totally agree. And I feel like so often as women, we're always trying to be perfect. That feeling of, like you were saying, that throughout your life, you never wanted to disappoint. You always wanted everything to be right, and for you to be right. And it's such a double-edged sword with mental illness, because you're right, we can't see, you know, general people are walking down the, you know, we see people walking down the street, we see a broken arm, we see a broken leg, we feel, you know, we feel sorry for that person, that, oh, that's too bad. We can't see mental illness, but that also means that we, as the person struggling with mental illness, isn't able to necessarily articulate it to people. You can't just, you know, start sharing that. So you're right, having communities where we feel they are safe, and where we have people that are supporting us, that we can actually share the truth of what's going on inside of our hearts and our minds, is so powerful. And that's why Wire is such a fabulous place that you've created, that really provides that opportunity for women to truly connect and share at a heart level.
Yes, that's, you know, I just think you're absolutely right. And you know, one of my big roadblocks for so long was, you know, somebody might suggest that, you know, I speak to someone or get some help. And I would say, oh yeah, I will, as soon as I figure it all out. Yeah. You know, this figuring out, like this. And I read recently, you know, the mind is a great servant, but a terrible master, you know, giving too much power to my mind. So my advice is, or my suggestion when I give tips to people in recovering from mental illness is, you know, you don't need to figure it out. Like, we've got people paid a lot of money, did a lot of schooling to figure that out. And that's why I say, if we can have somebody that we can connect with, and I don't need to explain to you how I feel, I just need to tell you what it's like to be me.
Yeah.
You know, I've had, you know, the privilege, the opportunity. I've had physical illness, you know, I've had cancer, and I've had mental illness, or I have it. So I've been through both. And I can tell you that when I had cancer, I couldn't really explain it, but my goodness, I could talk about it. People asked me about it. You know, you're kind of part of a very, a proud group when you're a cancer survivor or dealing with, like, there's no shame.
Yeah.
On the other hand, with mental illness, you know, I've had the same thing, and I went off work for both, and the experience was a bit different because I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know, you know, the details, but oh my gosh, if I could just reach people that are suffering with mental illness, like, it's okay that you don't understand and you can't name it and you can't describe it. Like, just please hear me, that you're not alone, and there's help, and there is hope, and there's recovery. You know, and we got to fight, because with mental illness, many of the illnesses within that umbrella, it lies to us. It tells us that nobody understands and nobody cares and we're worthless. Those are lies. They're big, big lies. And, you know, and I say with addiction as well, like, addiction and mental illness, they want us all part of their club. And the sicker we are, and, you know, it wants to get us in its clutches, and it wants to take some of us down.
So even today, even though you have so many tools, you have amazing support around you, you provide support, you're on medication, do you still have dark days?
Yes, I have dark days. I have dark, sometimes it's dark moments and days. Mornings can be particularly difficult. Waking up, and sometimes for no reason, there's just this heaviness that is sitting on my chest and is over me. And, you know, and I know it's a dark day and not just, you know, something passing. I can, and how I've learned to distinguish that is if, you know, if I just say, well, you know, I just want to stay in bed for a little bit, then that's not so bad. But if I say, I want to stay in bed and I want to stay here for like 2 or 3 days or months, then I know that it's something more.
Okay.
And it's not, you know, I talk about this all the time. I talk to hundreds of people and, you know, but when I get that darkness, I start asking myself the same questions. Do I have anything to say? Does anybody care? You know, but because I've developed this network and that I have people around me that can notice and ask me or can tell me what they see, then I'm blessed. Because because I don't notice all the time when I'm slipping or getting into this dark space. So, you know, maybe it's my partner or my kids will say, you know, you don't seem quite yourself, you know, anything I can do to help. And sometimes it's, yeah, I'm not feeling great and there's nothing to do to help, but I tell you that offer is invaluable.
What a great point to be made about us reaching out. There's all of this conversation about if you're struggling, you know, especially in light of the recent celebrity suicides, people saying, you know, just reach out, don't ever take your own life. And there was a lot of, a lot of people running counter to that, saying people are not able to reach out when they are in such a dark place.
Yeah.
So the healthy people per se need to be the ones reaching out. And I think that's what you're saying here, is that your family is able to then say, wait a minute. So developing that community around you, that support system around you, is so key. But man, I can imagine when people are struggling in the depths of despair, to try to build up a support network must feel almost impossible.
Yeah. And that's, you know, I do a lot of speaking and I deliver workshops on mental health self-care, which is part of my passion and part of, you know, way I reach a lot of people. But one of the things that I suggest is, you know, when you're feeling, and this is for all of us, because, you know, mental illness just happens to be the label that we have to get in order to get the treatment we need. But we all have mental health. People are very shocked. And I've had some good discussions like, you know, I say, well, we're not that different. My symptoms and how it manifests is just, you know, maybe more extreme. So they need to diagnose it and give it a label so they can treat me. But what I tell people, and for all of us to look after ourselves, we need to get some money in the bank. We need to build those networks and look after ourselves and try to get our sleep when we're feeling half decent, because we never know when we're going to take a dip. And that's the hardest time to start, you know, looking after ourselves.
Oh, so well said. So well said. Let's nourish our bodies from the inside out with meditation, with nutrition, with movement, with everything that we can do, building up the reserves.
And invest in those relationships.
Say that again.
Oh, sorry. Just invest in those relationships so that when I'm, you know, we're chatting and supporting each other, so that when I have a low period, then you're either going to know to call me, or it's going to be easy for me to reach out to you because I know you well and I trust you. You know, it's going to be easier to talk back to those voices that are telling me don't bother. Yeah,
and we have a contract, right? We've decided that we are in this together, and if I'm struggling, you're there for me, and vice versa.
Yeah. And just this is where I really get going, is on this mental health piece. But the other thing that because I hear this so much is, well, I don't want to make things worse with people. Well, I'm going to say two things, which I believe in from my experience, and I've heard it a zillion times. But number one thing is, you know, if I'm there to support someone, it's not about me. So it's not about, you know, whether I offer something, you accept it or not, because I may offer to support you and say, no, I'm fine, you know, but a month or two down the road, you might really need me and you're going to come to me because of that kindness. Secondly is that by asking me if I'm feeling suicidal or if I have a plan, you're not planting ideas. You're not going to make me all of a sudden become suicidal and take my life. You're not. Because if I'm in that place, then I'm in that place. And what might happen is you may save my life because you've asked.
So we should explicitly ask that question of people that we are very worried about?
Yes, absolutely. And I only know this because of my own experience and because I've been you know, studying and hearing a lot of professionals talk. And it's, you know, and sometimes we'll hear, you know, we might say, well, you know, suicidal thoughts. Well, I could probably go around the room and a good percentage of had the thoughts. Like a thought is just a thought. So we have to be very specific. Do you have a plan to hurt yourself or to take your life?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then you can go into more of a crisis management, and you know, that learning and training is readily available as well.
And you know that I have firsthand experience with that. I wrote about it recently. I shared that before my father, before we put him into treatment, I asked him point blank, Dad, are you trying to kill yourself with alcohol?
Oh, yeah.
And at the time, I didn't even know where the words were coming from or that I could ever summon that courage to ask it. But I think it was a real turning point for my dad, just for him to even know that I cared enough to ask that very scary question.
That's right.
And it did change a lot for us.
And I think when you're asked that question, it kind of breaks the hold that the thought and the plan has on you. Because it's, you know, part of mental illness is that you get very enclosed in your own mind and your darkness, eh? But if somebody is there and asks such a pointed, caring question, it's kind of like it shoots in a little something at you and say, oh, kind of starts you a little bit and gives you maybe a slight pause for cause. But no, you know, and I've been so blessed that, you know, I've been asked that. And, you know, I was asked probably the first time that by my daughter, you know, like how bloody amazing is that, you know? So it's just, I just wish I could help everybody, but I can't. But I just, you know, I understand what it's like to feel alone and hopeless. But there is hope, and there is help. And yes, sometimes we have to wait and bang doors and stuff. But my God, everybody's so worth it. You know, I really believe that. And you know, I just, Sarah, you know, for so long I thought I was less than, and I always looked at women like you and other women that, you know, are so beautiful and smart and successful, and I thought, you know, the lucky ones, the exceptional ones. And I've really come to learn is that, you know, we're all ordinary, but we are all extraordinarily ordinary. And I believe that, and I love the friends that I've made, and I love being able to see people more for who they are inside, you know, and that has been one of the gifts of mental illness for me. You know.
I think that is an absolutely beautiful place to leave this conversation. Patricia, thank you so much for all that you shared. And I wholeheartedly believe that you have helped at least one person through this conversation and through your sharing so openly and candidly. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Well, same to you, Sarah. And thank you so much for all that you do and your beautiful light. And I can't wait to see you.
To get access to all of the free videos and interviews, visit sobrietystartshere.com.